So, particularly when you start out in your coding journeys, um, you'll encounter a lot of errors. I say particularly when you start out, you'll encounter errors throughout your coding careers all the time. This will be routine. Your code won't work as expected. Now, sometimes it's because we've done something incorrectly, but sometimes the code goes wrong because of something that we didn't anticipate. Because of there's nothing wrong with our code, but something's gone wrong elsewhere. Like we've asked the user for an input, and they've done something that we didn't anticipate, and it's gone wrong. So, for example, we might ask the user to input a number, as you've done multiple times now, and they type in something that isn't a number, and the program will then terminate with an error. And you've probably seen things like this already in sort of trying out the sort of toy code examples. Now, where we've got something like that, or for reading something in from a file, which is more realistically the kind of thing you'll be doing, we don't really want our code to crash if something unexpected happens. That's not really good practice. A better approach is to use something known as exception handling. Now, exceptions are just basically a fancy way of saying errors. So exceptions are errors in programming. And basic exception handling allows us, much as the name would suggest, to handle those errors. It allows us to catch them and basically say, if that happens, you can tell Python what to do if it finds an error. So rather than crash, you're telling Python, if something goes wrong here, I want you to do this. And that's known as exception handling. And in Python, we do that using try and except statements. And basically, it's just a way of saying to Python, I want you to try doing the code in the block of code under try. And if anything goes wrong at any point, then I want you to jump out of that and run the code in the except block instead. So in this example here, we import the random library, and then we've got a try except statement. And again, we've got indentation. So this block of code, which is just one line, is the try block. So this is the code that should be tried by Python. And if anything goes wrong, I mean, there's only one line of code, but if anything goes wrong with that one line of code here, then it will run this stuff in the except statement. If nothing goes wrong, this will never get run, this stuff in the except statement. But it basically says, try this, and if anything goes wrong at any point, then run the stuff here. So here we've got to try a user input where we're going to get an input from the user, and then we're going to cast it as an integer. And then if something goes wrong, i.e. if the user types in something that is not able to be cast as an integer, then instead it will then run this piece of code here, where it'll say, sorry, that's not a valid number, and it'll automatically choose one for them, because the rest of our code is presumably dependent on a number being entered. So that's presumably why we've put it in. So here I've chosen to handle that. I could have handled it by saying, no, you need to input a valid number and making them input something else. Here I've decided to do that by saying, okay, well, I'll pick one for you. How you decide to handle it is entirely up to you and the design of your program and what you're trying to do. But the point is we're using exception handling here so that the code just doesn't crash if they do something wrong. Now, normally, try and accept is all you'll need for exception handling for most cases, but you can actually extend a try except statement by using else and finally as well. And it works like this. We can, in the try block, we're saying try this code, and if anything goes wrong at any point, then it will run this block of code in except. Now, we can also use else, which says run this code only if you didn't get any exceptions. So if you managed to get all the way to the end of try and there were no problems, then run this block of code that was in else. And we can also have a finally block, which it says run this block of code regardless of whether you got errors or not. So regardless of what happens up here, then run this code. So try this. If anything goes wrong, run this, otherwise don't run this. If nothing went wrong, then run this, and run this either way. So I flagged that up because you might need it. You may indeed need it for the next exercise. So probably worth noting. But generally speaking, try and accept will get you most of the way for the stuff you'll be doing, I think. So just a little brief note there about exception handling, because it is quite important whenever, and it's particularly important wherever you're trying to get some form of input, external input from the user, whether that be them manually typing something in, or you are trying to read in a file, or you're grabbing a download from a web reference, and that it may not exist, or the server might be down, or something where something could go wrong outside of your control. Then it's worth handling that.